3:47 a.m. The Gulf of Venezuela lay black and motionless under a moonless sky, its surface giving no hint of the violence unfolding beneath. 92 nautical miles northwest of Puerto Cabello, the Venezuelan Navy submarine S-31 Sabalo slipped silently below the thermocline, settling at a depth of 400 feet. Her diesel engines had been shut down hours earlier, replaced by the low hum of electric propulsion. Inside the pressure hull, 38 men breathed recycled air, heavy with the metallic taste of machinery, oil, and sweat. They had been submerged for 19 hours, waiting. Captain Ernesto Vargas stood rigid beside the periscope housing, one hand resting on the cold steel as he studied the passive sonar display. The screen did not show shapes or colors, only patterns of sound translated into lines and pulses. Yet to Vargas, it painted a terrifyingly clear picture. 14 kilometers to the northeast, a massive wall of noise rolled through the water. Multiple screws, enormous displacement, the unmistakable acoustic fingerprint of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington. This was not supposed to happen. American carriers did not operate this close to Venezuelan waters. The assumption had shaped every layer of planning in Caracas, yet satellite intelligence, received 3 days earlier, had confirmed the impossible. The George Washington had altered course in the southern seas and transited north through the Caribbean. Her strike group stretched across more than 200 nautical miles. From Venezuela's perspective, it was an opening too rare to ignore. Vargas reviewed his fire control solution for the final time. 2 SST-4 torpedoes sat ready in tubes 1 and 2. German-made, wire-guided weapons capable of running 20 nautical miles at 23 knots. His orders were blunt and unambiguous. Fire, then run. What the briefing had not emphasized was the carrier's most immutable rule. A Nimitz-class ship never truly travels alone. 12 hours earlier, far to the north, a Boeing P-8A Poseidon had lifted off from Naval Air Station Jacksonville, call sign Hunter 71. The aircraft climbed to 28,000 feet before settling into a patrol orbit roughly 300 kilometers northeast of Venezuela. On board, a crew of 9 began methodically seeding the ocean with sonobuoys. 112 acoustic sensors splashed into the water in a precise grid covering 40 square miles. Passive buoys listened patiently for machinery noise. Active buoys pinged, waiting for echoes. Multi-static arrays overlapped, forming an invisible net capable of detecting even the faintest submarine movement. At 01:15 p.m., the net tightened. A weak but distinct diesel signature appeared, matching the acoustic profile of a Type 209 submarine. The operators tracked it for 6 minutes before classification was confirmed. S-31 Sabalo, bearing 273, speed 4 knots, depth 350 feet. The P-8 transmitted the contact via encrypted data link. Within seconds, the information rippled across the American battle network. On board the USS Porter, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer positioned 12 nautical miles off the carrier's starboard beam, Commander Jennifer Walsh studied the incoming data. The submarine was executing a textbook Cold War approach, riding the thermal layer to mask its signature while creeping toward torpedo range. It was precisely the maneuver taught for decades to diesel boat captains facing superior surface fleets. It was also precisely the tactic modern sensors were designed to defeat. Walsh ordered general quarters. The ship's anti-submarine warfare suite surged to life. Hull-mounted sonar began active pinging as the TB-37 towed array slipped beneath the thermocline. The geometry shifted instantly. The shadow zone that had hidden the submarine now worked against it, exposing the sabalo to sensors looking up from below. At 03:22, two MH-60R Seahawk helicopters lifted off from the Porter's flight deck. Each carried 4 Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes and a dipping sonar capable of probing deep into the water column. They spread out, hovering and lowering their sensors like surgeon's instruments. The trap was closing. Inside the sabalo, the atmosphere changed. Condensation dripped from overhead pipes. The sonar operator reported new contacts, rotor noise, then more. 3 helicopters. That number mattered. Standard American doctrine called for 2 aircraft per submarine contact. 3 meant certainty. Vargas checked the range to the carrier, 14,000 yards, outside the optimal envelope. The SST-4 could reach that distance, but only barely. Beyond 10,000 yards, wire guidance became unreliable. The torpedo would eventually go autonomous, swimming blind toward a target guarded by the most sophisticated defenses ever put to sea. His executive officer leaned in close, voice low but urgent. The Americans knew. Vargas saw only 2 paths forward: abort and attempt to withdraw, or fire now and accept whatever followed. The political decision had already been made in Caracas. At 03:48, the military one followed. Vargas ordered tubes 1 and 2 flooded. Water roared into the launch chambers, echoing through the hull like a warning bell. The moment the torpedoes were expelled, stealth ended. Compressed air ejection produced a sharp acoustic transient that raced through the water. To American hydrophones, it sounded like a cannon shot. On the Porter, alarms sounded. Torpedo in the water, bearing confirmed, range 12,000 yards. Commander Walsh had less than a minute to respond. She did not hesitate. The AN/SLQ-25 Nixie decoy streamed from the destroyer's stern, broadcasting an amplified imitation of the ship's propeller noise. To an incoming seeker, it was irresistible. Almost simultaneously, the Porter's Mark 32 tubes fired. 2 Mark 54 torpedoes splashed into the sea and immediately acquired the submarine's hull above them. From above, Hunter 71 refined the picture, dropping additional buoys to tighten the solution. On the tactical display, the geometry became brutal and inevitable. The Venezuelan torpedoes curved east, chasing the decoy. The American weapons drove west, accelerating toward the sabalo at 40 knots. Vargas heard them before he was told, a high-pitched whine growing sharper by the second. Active seekers pinged, confirmed, locked. He ordered emergency speed. The submarine surged to 21 knots, her maximum. It changed nothing. At 03:51, the first torpedo struck the stern. The shaped charge warhead detonated against the pressure hull at 370 feet. Seawater exploded inward, flooding the engine room almost instantly. The submarine pitched sharply as its center of gravity shifted aft. Emergency blow systems fired, forcing compressed air into the ballast tanks. It was not enough. 11 seconds later, the second torpedo hit amidships. The combined damage was terminal. At 420 feet, the hull collapsed. The implosion was instantaneous. All 38 crew were killed without warning. The engagement, from launch to destruction, had lasted just over 3 minutes. Above, the carrier steamed on, untouched. The Venezuelan torpedo continued its pursuit long after its target was gone. For nearly 6,000 yards, it chased the Nixie decoy eastward, its guidance system locked onto the false acoustic signature. When the wire connection finally registered as severed, the weapon shifted into autonomous search mode. It circled twice, found nothing worth killing, exhausted its fuel, and sank quietly into the darkness. The decoy that defeated it cost $87,000. The submarine it had avenged cost more than $160 million. At 0355, new symbols bloomed across the radar displays aboard the USS George Washington. 18 fast-moving surface contacts surged northward from the Venezuelan coastline, riding low and fast, their wakes stretching like scars across the sea. They were closing at over 40 knots. The contact classification was immediate: fast attack craft. Missile boats. This was the second phase. While the submarine had drawn the eyes and ears of the American screen, the surface strike was meant to finish the job. Venezuelan PKAP-3 missile boats, Iranian-designed platforms optimized for speed rather than survival, surged toward the carrier under cover of darkness. Each carried C-802 anti-ship missiles capable of striking from beyond the horizon. The plan was simple and brutal. Overwhelm the carrier's defenses with numbers. Force leaks through the shield. Accept losses. What the planners in Caracas did not account for was time. The American battle network had been watching the flotilla since it left Puerto Cabello. Satellite coverage had recorded the sortie more than 12 hours earlier. The missile boats were not a surprise. They were an appointment. 40 nautical miles south of the carrier, the USS Gravely, a Flight 2A Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, maintained station in darkness. Her Aegis combat system tracked all 18 contacts with clinical precision. Speed, heading, formation changes, nothing escaped the radar picture. Fire control solutions existed for every target long before the boats crossed into international waters. At 0402, the Venezuelan formation split into two attack groups, attempting a flanking maneuver designed to divide defensive fire. It was a classic adaptation of Soviet swarm doctrine, reshaped for the confined waters of the Caribbean. On the Gravely's bridge, the captain watched the maneuver unfold without emotion. The boats had reached 50 nautical miles from the carrier, maximum missile range. Their radars flickered to life. This was the commitment point. The authorization came down the line. The Gravely's vertical launch system answered instantly. Missile hatches snapped open across the deck, and 16 RIM-162 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles erupted into the pre-dawn sky. Their rocket motors burned white-hot, clawing upward before pitching toward the horizon. Each missile was assigned a separate target. The Aegis system adjusted trajectories in real time, compensating for speed, maneuver, and sea state. The Venezuelan crews had seconds to process what was happening. There was no warning shot, no escalation ladder. The first Sea Sparrow struck at 0403. A 38-foot missile boat traveling at 42 knots vanished in a flash of fire and shrapnel, disintegrating into debris scattered across hundreds of meters of ocean. The second impact followed less than 2 seconds later, then another, and another. The southeastern horizon became a wall of flame. 14 boats were destroyed in the opening salvo. Some were torn apart by direct hits. Others detonated when their own missiles cooked off in the inferno. 4 survivors attempted to break away, turning south at maximum speed while transmitting frantic distress calls back to Caracas. 2 were eliminated by follow-on missiles before they could clear the engagement zone. The remaining pair fled into the darkness, empty-handed and burning. No Venezuelan missile reached launch parameters. From first impact to last, the engagement lasted 47 seconds. American casualties were 0. By 0430, the carrier's combat air patrol had established a reinforced protective barrier across the northern approaches. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets orbited at 25,000 feet, their APG-79 radars sweeping the Venezuelan coastline for any sign of follow-on attacks. There were none. Operation Bolivarian Thunder had expended its entire striking force in a single catastrophic failure. The cost analysis was stark. Venezuela had committed more than $600 million in naval assets, 1 submarine, 18 missile boats, over 300 sailors. The American response consumed roughly $43 million in munitions and expendables. The exchange ratio would be studied in war colleges for decades. At 06:15, the USS George Washington resumed her transit north. Flight operations continued uninterrupted. The carrier did not alter course. She did not increase speed. No emergency maneuvers were ordered. From the perspective of those on board, the engagement was already receding into routine. Another contact, another report, another line in the logbook. 3 days later, the Venezuelan government announced its losses. State television framed the incident as an act of American aggression. International reaction was muted. Satellite imagery showed the Sabalos torpedo tubes flooded at the moment of destruction. The attack had been real. The response had been decisive. In Washington, analysts compiled the after-action report. 17 pages long, it ended with a single observation. Venezuela had attempted a surprise attack against the most defended warship ever constructed. The outcome had been determined before the first torpedo left its tube. Some theorists argue that asymmetric warfare allows smaller nations to bloody superior forces through ingenuity and risk. The Gulf of Venezuela offered a different lesson. There is no clever tactic against a sensor network that tracks you from the moment you sortie. No acceptable loss ratio when your strike force is annihilated in under a minute. No victory in sacrificing hundreds of lives for an illusion of defiance. The carrier steamed on toward her next port of call. Somewhere behind her, wreckage settled slowly onto the seabed. The ocean closed over it, indifferent and silent, remembering every miscalculation.